Good afternoon, everyone. It is your main man, Dave P. with RJ Pepino. Welcome to the Cream Real Estate Channel, where we talk about everything cash flow, real estate, and money. RJ, what are we getting into today?
Exciting subject, guys. The most exciting stuff because we like to make money. It's our favorite thing to do, but then it's not about how much you make, but how much you keep. And so we have a special guest today, and I'm excited to have him on. And we were going to get right back into it, aren't we?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I couldn't have said it better. It's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep. And when you're talking about keeping your money, you're talking about keeping your money out of the hands of the greedy government. And that's exactly what we're all about. Today, we have Mr. Juan Deshawn from Quest Trust Company. I cannot share enough good things about Quest Trust Company. RJ and I have numerous accounts with Quest. We're going to be getting into the different types of financial planning and self-directed accounts that Quest offers. We have some questions here for Juan, but Juan, thank you very much for joining us. How long have you been with Quest now, Juan?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. I've been with Quest now for almost 5 years. So dealing with clientele and dealing with IRA accounts been like three of those years. Prior to that, it was kind of more of just learning, studying a lot. There's a big training program here at Quest, make sure we know what we're talking about when it comes down to IRA. So that was like a year-long process. But yeah, 4 or 5 years almost with Quest now.
You're doing great, man. And you have really bent over backwards for us. You help us so much. I really do want to express our gratitude for you and Quest in general, but specifically you, Juan. You're always going the extra mile for us. And when it comes to getting deals done, RJ and I are very active investors with our IRAs. And maybe we could start right there with the IRA. So there's two different, Quest deals with what's called a self-directed IRA. Now, there's no such thing as a self-directed IRA. There's just an IRA. An IRA is an individual retirement account. What makes Quest special is they allow investors like myself and RJ to self-direct or make the decision. So what separates a company like Quest from like a Merrill Lynch or a Wells Fargo or something like that, if you open an IRA with one of those companies, they don't let you do real estate transactions and self-direct your money. They're just going to give you, door number one, door number two, or door number three, which is like mutual funds and bonds and stocks and stuff like that. So we are real estate investors, and what we like about a self-directed IRA is it allows us to self-direct our IRA money to do real estate transactions. So with that being said, Juan, why don't you tell us the different types of IRAs? There's a Roth IRA and a traditional IRA. What is the main differences there?
Yeah, I mean, you hit that definition right in the nail. There is no difference. Marketing term, all that self-directed doesn't mean anything. So when I want you guys to think about retirement accounts, it's probably what everyone's already used to already. Traditional Roth IRA, those are just 2 of 7 that we have here at Quest, and 2 of the many that you probably hear about at Merrill Lynch, Fidelity, wherever you're at. Traditional Roth IRAs, what we call them as our personal accounts. They're accounts that people can have for their personal use. You don't have to necessarily have an employer sponsor it, or you don't have to have like a full-time job to get that retirement savings in place. You can just set one up based on what you're looking for. There's some key benefits for the traditional Roth IRA. Traditional IRA, I'll start with that one. It's probably the most common out there. The reason being is because that's an account that's dealing with a pre-tax bucket of money, usually originating from an old 401k plan that you had in corporate America, and you're moving it into a traditional now. So you're keeping those funds pre-tax. Or when you're putting money in, maybe your goal is to reduce taxes and you want a deduction, right? So for a few people who may qualify based on their income, they can get a deduction by putting some money away towards retirement, all right? Whereas the Roth on the other side is kind of a little bit of the opposite. There is no benefit on the front end. It doesn't give you a deduction on the front end, but the real benefit and the reason why people seek it out a lot is how it grows. If you are able to use a Roth IRA correctly, you can put money in and you can take money out tax-free. Meaning you can grow $100 to $1,000 and take out that profit tax-free, or $100,000 to $1 million, right? And take that out tax-free contingent. You meet some qualifications. But ultimately, that's kind of the grand scheme of things. The idea is a Roth can grow your wealth tax-free. A traditional IRA can grow your wealth by deferring taxes continuously until you decide to touch it.
I did not know that you can write off your contribution to a traditional IRA. Can you write off 100% of the contribution?
Yes, as long as you qualify. So there is actually a phase out range, depending on your income. So I actually pulled up the numbers while we were talking earlier, because I knew it would come up. And just to give an example, for an individual who is married and filing jointly, if they are below $104,000, they can 100% write that off.
Okay.
But the phase out range, meaning it's between 104 and $124,000, means you may be able to write some of it off, but not all of it.
I understand.
And then once you make over that amount, you can't.
That makes a lot of sense. And then what is the maximum contribution for a traditional IRA annually?
Yeah, and this is for both traditional and Roth. The maximum you can do a year, a tax year, is $6,000 for individuals under the age of 50. And you get an additional $1,000 to make $7,000 if you're over the age of 50. They call that the catch-up contribution. And again, the key thing is you have up until your tax filing deadline. So it's not a calendar year, January to December. It's usually January till April 15th.
Okay, so with a Roth IRA, there's no tax deduction on your contribution. However, you said you can turn $100 into $1,000, and that profit of $900 is not taxed. Can you pull that money out just right away?
So a portion of it, possibly. So a Roth IRA, I like to call it a glorified savings account, because money you put in is always available to you at any point in time. I like to call that my basis, or we call it the basis. So for example, if throughout the years, I'm putting in $1,000, or let's just say the maximum, I'm maxing it out, $6,000 for the next 10 years. At that 10th year, I'm gonna have a basis of $60,000, meaning I can always take out 60 grand completely tax-free and clear, because that's my money, right? Now, when it comes down to the money you've earned, that's the part where you can't touch. That's the part where there's rules, where the IRS says, okay, in order to touch what you've made off the money you've added into this Roth IRA, you need to meet two qualifications: be at least 59 and a half, as well as have had that Roth IRA for 5 years. Both of those things there. So for someone like myself, if I started my Roth IRA, which I did about 2 years ago, I'm gonna surpass that 5-year mark no matter what. I'm just waiting until I'm 59 and a half to be able to touch everything that I have in the Roth IRA account. But at the current moment, I can only touch what I put in.
Excellent, excellent, description there. Now, I know RJ and his wife are shopping for a new primary residence. So RJ has a few different IRAs with Quest. Can he use that money towards the purchase of a primary residence?
You can, and again, up to a certain amount. You can actually distribute those funds up to $10,000, either from a traditional or Roth IRA, without penalty. So typically there's a 10% penalty if you're below that age. You can distribute up to 10 grand without penalty to go towards your homestead purchase. It has to be your first homestead, which I believe means that it has to be at least within 2 years. You can buy one home and 2 later, your next one as well. And interestingly enough, if you and your spouse and you both have a Roth IRA, each of you are eligible to take out 10 grand each. So that's nice towards that down payment. If it is coming out of a traditional IRA, it would be probably taxable. If it's coming out of Roth IRA, it wouldn't. And that's going to be on top of whatever your basis is. So going back to what I just discussed, if in general you already had a basis of 10 grand, well, potentially you can even take out 20 because you're taking out your basis plus what they give you.
Can you always take out your previous basis for all 5 years? If you did, 6, let's just pretend 6K. Okay. So you could always pull out what you put in, penalty and tax free.
Yeah, you can put it out a minute later after putting it in. You can put it out years down the line. Yeah, that's why I call it the glorified savings account, because you can't touch what you grow, but what you put in is always yours.
And then I have a quick question, not to be sharing all of RJ's business on the interwebs, but if he has, which I know he does, he has a Roth IRA, but then he also has an inherited IRA that he set up with his father. Would the 10K be? Could you pull it out of either both of them? So could he do 10K out of each one penalty free to go towards the homestead?
So when it comes down to his, yes, but when we're talking about the inherited IRA account, that's gonna be a little different. because he already has some benefits there having an inherited IRA account. So at the moment, RJ could take out money at any point in time if he wanted to, because it's an inherited IRA account. So there is no penalty despite his age. And if it's Roth, it's also tax-free off the bat. So that's kind of the nice thing about inherited Roth IRA accounts is you can take money out any point in time, tax-free and clear. So you don't necessarily need the exception. Now, though, the rules are a little different. RJ, you may have inherited your IRA prior to 2020, right?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
set up. His father is still alive.
Oh, okay. So you haven't inherited it yet then?
No.
Okay, yeah. So
We
so
created-
what,
I think
what
it's-
will happen is, sorry, you're mute right now. I don't know if you were saying something.
No, we created it, I think, within like a couple years. But,
Okay. Yeah. So, but what's going to happen though is because, obviously, good thing your father hasn't passed away, is the rules have changed with inherited IRA accounts. It's not going to affect you, but basically, what's going to happen is when that time comes, you will have 10 years to deplete the account. But within that time frame, you can use that account however you want, and you can take money out of that account however you please without having to worry about penalty or taxation. Just so you know. But you'll have 10 years basically to decide that to deplete the account. On that 10th year, you have to kind of dissolve the account entirely.
And that was the Secure Act that changed that.
That's correct. Yeah, the Secure Act changed that in 2020.
Okay. So one thing that you've told me on previous calls, Juan, is, RJ and I both have Roths with Quest. Now, you have told me you should really look into a solo 401k.
Right.
So tell us about a solo 401k and Quest. Quest does offer these as well, right?
We do, yeah. They're a little different than how we offer IRA accounts. So you guys know that with an IRA accounts, we do a lot of the administrative work. Whenever there's an investment, you have to go through us. You have to speak to someone here at Quest to make money move. With a solo 401k, it's a little different. So what a solo 401k is a plan that's for individuals who have self-employment income and don't have any full-time employees. Maybe have a partner in the business or have their spouse that also works for them. But ultimately, you don't have any full-time like W-2 employees, running around. So what happens is if you're eligible for that, you can actually create yourself this solo 401k plan that is created to sort of copycat 401ks that we see in W-2 corporate world. In a W-2 corporate world, you have an employer and an employee relationship. The employer will somewhat match or put some money in based on compensation. The employee will also put some money in as deferral from their paychecks. This solo 401k copies that, but since there isn't necessarily an HR department, you play both roles. You're both employer and your employee. Along with that, you also become the trustee of this 401k plan, meaning you have complete control. So right now in the IRA accounts, you call Quest, you want to make an investment. We're the ones signing on behalf of the IRA because we're a custodian. With a 401k account, you wouldn't even give us a call. You would actually have authorization to actually sign on behalf of the 401k plan, make investments, and even write that check. So it gives you a lot more control, flexibility, contingent you qualify. I am a strong believer it's a superior account. It does come with a lot of responsibility, and with that, it can be dangerous for some. Rules still apply to you. Just because you have the checkbook doesn't mean you can go off and buy a truck with it, right? Or for yourself, you have to still abide by the prohibited transaction laws. You still should know how to use that account wisely, and also you now are keeping up with your own administration of that because you no longer have Quest to do it. You're doing the bookkeeping, for example, like you would if you're running an LLC. You would do it now for your 401k. That's a whole separate entity.
Question. So RJ and I own businesses that do employ W-2 employees.
Okay.
Would we not qualify for the solo K?
You wouldn't. So because of grouping laws, you have to provide the same benefits that you may be providing at, employer A, even though it has no employees. Maybe company B does. You can't set up a 401k for this entity and not this one. So for you guys, because you guys have employees full time, it's a little more complex. You'd have to get a 401k plan that will allow for 401ks, or sorry, for employees, which there are out there, but unfortunately, Quest doesn't have that kind of plan. If you guys had a company and you didn't have full-time employees, maybe you just contract people out, or you had part-time employees, they worked under a certain hour a year, then you'd qualify. So
And that would be called, that would then be a defined benefit plan, correct? That's for.
Yeah, so they're kind of like interchangeable terms. Defined benefit plan, profit sharing plan, solo 401k. They're kind of all the same thing. Yeah.
So tell us about an HSA.
Yeah. HSA is one of my favorite accounts. I personally, so I have Roth and HSA accounts. What I have.
So HSA stands for what?
Oh yeah, health savings account. Sorry.
Health savings account. So now we're getting into an HSA, everybody, and this is a health savings account. And Juan is going to teach us how these accounts can help us with our medical expenses. We're all human beings. Inevitably, there are medical expenses. So tell us about the HSA. Thank you, Juan.
Yeah. So for starters, another account that you got to make sure you qualify to contribute to. So to make sure you qualify, probably safest just to call your health provider and just ask them if you're HSA compatible, or if you know you have a high deductible health plan. That's kind of the you need that plan. You need a high deductible health plan. On top of that, you can't be a dependent on someone else's tax return. So if you have a family, if you're the head of the household, you're the one with the HSA, probably not your children, probably not your spouse. So those are the two key things there. But the way the health savings account works, or the HSAs, think of it like a IRA account that we've been discussing already. But it proves beneficial because you can take money out at any point in time as long as it's being used to pay for qualified medical expenses. And that money comes out tax-free. And I'll explain that in a second. But a qualified medical expense, for example, my glasses, these were paid out of an HSA. I can't see far. I need glasses to read and all that. So I paid these with my HSA. Chiropractic visits. I use my HSA to go to the chiropractor. I'm going to the dentist actually tomorrow. I'm going to use my HSA for that. Right? These are qualified medical expenses that are needed for my health. So I get a lot of questions sometimes like, what about plastic surgery? Unfortunately not, unless it was necessary to your health. That wouldn't be a qualifying thing. Typically prescribed medicine at the current moment, because of the CARES Act, right now I believe it said that we can actually do over-the-counter medicine with the HSA as well, but usually it's prescribed. And the coolest thing about the HSA account is money you put into it. I'll go over the contribution limits in a sec, but money you put into it is tax deductible. And then you take money out of it for a medical expense, tax free. So you're kind of getting the best of the both worlds there, because there's no other account out there that give you a deduction and give you tax-free distributions at the end.
So
now, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Juan. So as far as the contribution, I want to really hammer that point home because it was good. So with an HSA, health savings account, you can contribute, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's $3,600 for an individual. Is that correct? And $7,200 for a married couple?
Yeah, exactly. It just went up. And so basically not necessarily a married couple, but if you have dependents, that's the way, because you don't have to be married, but if you have children, you can do that family. Yeah.
Okay. Well, RJ has a beautiful little daughter, and I do not. I am single with no dependents. So RJ would be allowed to contribute $7,200 of after-tax money into an HSA.
Right.
And then when he deposits that money into his HSA, that $7,200, that's 100% tax deductible against his earned income. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so he's got $7,200 sitting in this account now, and he can, if it's a self-directed HSA, which Quest offers, he could go, what if he found a cheap house and bought the house and then flipped it and made a $15,000 profit? That money, those profits would go back into the HSA tax-free, correct? So
right.
That is tax-free. And now he has in his, account $22,500, and all that money can be used and pulled out for qualified medical expenses. Is that correct?
That's correct. In HSA here at Quest, it works kind of more of reimbursements, or we pay for expenses as they come because we don't provide debit cards. We're just not a bank, so we can't. But in instances where some HSAs do provide you a debit card, you do be able to swipe that away, right? Using it for, doctor visits and all. So that's kind of a very, very a neat feature there. So yeah.
So you get reimbursed. So RJ takes his daughter to a doctor visit, and there's a deductible of, $200, call it, right? He will get that money back from his HSA, as he pays for it out of his pocket, and he gets reimbursed. Is that right?
Yeah, he'd get it back if he submits that same day. He'll get it back within a day or two. You'd have the $200 back in him. in his account, reimbursed by his HSA. So that's exactly how it is. You just take the money out of the HSA account. A lot of times, just a little like piece of advice, what I do personally, even with my HSA, is I like to have a debit card for that reason, just not to go through the hassle of reimbursements, especially when we're dealing with self-direction. I'll explain why. But so I keep a very minimum in my Bank of America HSA account, which they give me a debit card, and I use that for the doctor visits and all that. But what I have over, because I don't go to the doctor too much, I don't have any kids, fairly young, I barely go. What I do is I move the rest to my self-directed HSA account, and I do loans alongside my Roth, and usually those are deployed out. Like right now, I have it deployed out between 7 months to a year, and so obviously I can't use those for medical expenses at the moment. But my whole goal is to actually just continue to grow that, because eventually I know I'm going to be able to take that out tax-free, right? It's a huge bucket of money. And so I let my Quest one do the investing, and I use my HSA at Bank of America to pay for immediate expenses. I keep a minimum in there. So you could do that as well if you need those expenses, if you need paying those things, or for someone who doesn't have the cash available and needs their HSA.
Question. So for instance, the 3,600 or 7,200 contribution maximum, is that per HSA account? So if I started one with Bank of America to have that debit card for the immediate expenses, and then started one with Quest that I'm going to use for real estate and other things, is the maximum contribution amongst all your accounts, or can you have an unlimited amount of HSAs?
Great question. You can have unlimited HSAs, but it's not going to increase the contribution amount. So it's a cumulative amount, right? So it's across the board. You don't want to over contribute, because each custodian may not know if you're over contributing here or there, but they're going to report how much you did put into that HSA, and that's going to get reported under taxes, and that can cause penalties if you do too much. So
RJ, any questions up to this point? I know we're kind of buzzing through here. I see you writing some stuff down. You're on mute, brother.
I've got some just some questions. So right, I wrote down 7,200, right, after tax money contribute. Is there, and that you can't put any more than that? Like you can't.
So well, I'll add to that. That's the contribution limit. So of course you can earn more, right? There's no limit on earnings. If you're over the age of 55, you can add $1,000. Right, that's the catch-up age, 55. And one thing I also want to add that I didn't get to mention is, if you're an individual who doesn't necessarily have medical expenses at the current moment to reimburse yourself for, to pay for, let's say, for example, RJ's got his HSA right now. He puts some money in it, but a medical expense occurs that he just doesn't have that much in his HSA to reimburse him for. Keep that receipt. What can happen is, years down the line, when you're investing that HSA, and like in that last example of Dave you gave, let's say he has $22,000 now, he can now reimburse himself. You can still reimburse yourself for past medical expenses, as long as that medical expense occurred from the time the HSA was active. So that's a really neat thing, because that can be 10 years down the line, right? And then now that medical expense has been paid for, right? It's out of your pocket, but you can reimburse yourself years later for it, completely tax-free. Technically it's a reimbursement for the health expense, but now you have this money, which you could use to, I don't know, go on vacation, right? But technically it was a reimbursement. So there's actually like a backtracking system an HSA has that is very, very neat.
As long as the medical expense happened after the inception of the account, correct?
Correct, yeah. So if you started your account today and contributed to it, the way the IRS would see it is it started January 1st, 2021. So it has to occur after that.
All right, RJ, before we get into the CISA Coverdell accounts, any other questions?
No questions, just realizations.
Yeah, good stuff. Juan's the man. So let's bring it on home here. We talked about Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs. We just got done talking about HSAs. Now we're going to talk about the CISA. That is the
Coverdell Education Savings Account.
Coverdell. And that's Coverdell, not Coverdale. Some people say Coverdale. I used to say that. It's Cover, Coverdell.
Yeah.
And the Coverdell Education Savings Account. How does that work, Juan?
Yeah, so very similar to how the HSA is a special account for medical expenses. The ESA, I'll call it the ESA, is a special account for education expenses, but specifically for a child. So what happens here is you can set one up for a child under the age of 18. And every year until they turn 18, you can contribute and add funds to it of $2,000. This is per child. So if you had 3 children, you can have 3 different ESAs and put 2 grand per person. So it's a very small amount contribution wise, but the idea behind it is over time, as you're contributing $2,000, you're also investing it and you're growing and growing and growing. And at any point in time between then and when they go off to college, whatever it is, you can distribute the funds, take some money out, or use that to pay for education or qualified educational expenses, which is a broad amount of things. I mean, this could be tuition, obviously very common. Uniform, if it's a private school. It can be books, supplies, equipment, room and board, laptops. I actually had once the beneficiary of the ESA, it's the actual daughter, call once because she had, I guess, turned 18. I guess her parents told her about this ESA account she had. She bought $5,000 in there. It wasn't a big account. I guess they recently started it, but she was able to take that money out completely tax-free to herself to go ahead and buy herself like a MacBook, right? So that qualifies because you need a laptop to do your homework, especially these days with Zoom University, right? So you need it. So it's a very unique account, and you can invest it completely like the other accounts, completely like the HSA. You can invest it all together. But the idea behind it is you can take money out for the child's benefit completely tax-free. It goes up until 18 that you can contribute. The child can continue to use it until they're age 30. At age 30, they have to decide what to do with this account. They can either distribute to themselves as taxable income at this point, if they do, or they can actually pass it down. So they can pass it down to their child, to their niece, to their nephew, someone else in the family, or maybe not even family member, but just a child you can pass it down to. So it's kind of a way to also create generational wealth. Quincy Long is, I think, probably the best user of the ESA I've ever met, because he was able to basically set up an ESA account and ultimately hold rental properties in there eventually. It was funny because he had it set up to where he'd be able to pay an SMU tuition in an ESA account completely tax-free. That's where one of his daughters went. But what happened was he had an asset that he couldn't sell. It was a rental property. It just wouldn't sell. So by the time that he got the cash back and sold that property, his daughter graduated. Right. So luckily he was in position to pay for that tuition himself, but he couldn't use the ESA for what he meant to. But now it can go to the grandchild. Right. So it's still going to benefit someone in the future. It's still going to benefit someone in his family. Or it could have gone to just income for her. Right. So both ways, it still is very beneficial. And then he was setting them up pretty nicely there. But that's something to consider, especially with self-directed ESAs, is what kind of investments am I investing it into? Because one, you got to be a little savvy with smaller accounts. And two, you're dealing with as I'll say, illiquid assets, right? A real estate asset is it's harder to sell than just selling a share of stock. So that's something to consider as well.
So let me just cover my notes here. The Coverdell account, the Coverdell Education Savings Account, which is also just called the ESA, Education Savings Account. You're allowed to contribute $2,000 per child per year. That's the maximum contribution. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you can contribute up until the child is 18 years old. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And then you could continue to grow the money indefinitely, and that child can utilize that for educational, qualified education expenses up until they're 30 years old. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And I know it's a pretty broad, thing as far as what is a qualified education expense. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, even like, earbuds, earphones and stuff like that. I mean, in today's day and age.
You can fairly get pretty creative. I'm sure you're not going to, I believe you may be able to find websites somewhere. I know for the medical expenses, there are websites created out there that get really specific with what qualifies. I don't know if they do that with the ESA. But if you look at the publication with the IRS, what they really dive down into is kind of the more broad things, but they do specify what kind of colleges do count and when universities do count and what don't. For example, I'm pretty sure schools that are from specialized trades don't necessarily count. Right. So there are some things that don't, which is pretty good to look at if you do have an ESA account. It's on publication 960, I want to say. Where it kind of lays it out for you, or to look up ESA IRS publication, but it'll tell you kind of what may or may not qualify in a broad way. But ultimately, again, these accounts are, what happens is the custodian will just request you maybe proof of the expense, or maybe just distribute and say it's for educational expense, and they may not look into it too much. But as long as you have the receipts to prove it, you should be in the clear. And that's if you even get audited, right? These aren't necessarily, I would consider, highly audited accounts, but they are there to help you.
And we always want to make sure we're always doing everything the right way. That's what people need to realize. It's like, look, guys, you don't need to cheat and be sneaky to save a ton of money on taxes and build wealth. This is what RJ and I are always talking about. You know, do everything the right way. Just do it with the right people. And there's no better people to do this stuff with than Quest Trust Company down there in Houston. Real quick on the ESA, do you have to have this child as a dependent to set up the account for them? Or
Great question. No, you don't. So a lot of times we definitely see uncles, putting their nieces, opening accounts for their nieces, or grandparents are often a lot of times the people contributing to these accounts. So no, you can set it up for almost any. I can set it up for your daughter, RJ, right? You can do it no matter what. You usually have to have the guardian's consent. For example, on our application, ask for the guardian's consent, but anybody can be the contributor. Anybody. One little interesting rule, speaking of that, which reminds me, is there actually is an income limit on if you're eligible to contribute to an ESA. Now, I think it's probably one of the weirdest rules the IRS has, because it doesn't make necessarily any sense. So the IRS says that if your adjusted gross income is above $220,000, you're ineligible to contribute to an ESA account. Very odd rule, because then they also go and say that anyone can contribute to an ESA account. So, for example, if you are in that category where you're making over $220,000, but maybe your parents are not, the grandparents, what if the grandparents contributed? Where do they get the $2,000? Doesn't necessarily matter, right? So it's kind of a weird rule that they even have that on there. So for anybody that kind of sees that in the publication, there's a very legal and right way to kind of fix that. Just have someone else contribute for them.
so funny.
But it's a very weird rule. Like, why do you have an income limit for an ESA?
It's just one of those other government, nonsense that is unfortunately littered throughout our entire legal and tax system, which is an absolute racket. So with this being said, RJ, what questions do you happen to have here on the ESA?
I don't have any questions, and really, it's just like, when do I get started, right?
We are getting started. Our first step here for the HSA, we need to verify with our insurance company that we have qualified insurance for this. And we have Anthem, so I'm probably guessing that it is going to be qualified, but we're going to get that cleared up. And then Juan, we're going to work with you to get started on our HSAs and our ESA accounts. I will be setting up an ESA account for my girlfriend's child, who I consider my own, and happy to start growing that account. One quick question. If RJ and I located a real estate deal and maybe we wanted to do the deal together, is it okay if maybe my Roth account does a deal with his HSA account and kind of do that? As long as it was a qualified transaction, third party we're purchasing the house from or something like that?
Absolutely. So you can partner all those accounts together. You can even partner family accounts together. I mean, you can do your Roth IRA, that child's ESA, your girlfriend's Roth IRA, RJ, same situation. You can kind of put as many accounts as you want all together on a deal. Typically what happens is the way they go into the deal is the way those profits get split as well. So if the ESA only has, let's say, for example, 3% of the deal, it's only going to receive 3% of the profit, right? Just to give an example. But absolutely, you can kind of use multiple accounts together to fund larger transactions. And that's kind of the thing I will mention with these accounts. You're thinking of $2,000 a year, not a whole lot you can start with. So you got to be a little savvy. You got to leverage the other accounts that you have. You got to leverage the network that you have, right? Dave uses RJ, vice versa. So that's kind of the key thing. You guys are kind of, as you mentioned, you guys are very active clients. You guys are constantly doing that. But I preach it so much to people because sometimes you have to use other people to help you out, and everyone can grow wealth together. But the ESAs and HSA accounts are very great accounts to be partnered up with other accounts as well. I use my HSA.
Yeah, you can have the account, you could contact one, you can set the account up, but knowing how to use this account in real estate transactions, creative real estate transactions, that is where the rubber meets the road. And that's the real, the power of these things. You can have the account, but if you don't know how to use it, then you're not really going to be able to get the maximum benefits. And that's what we teach everybody here. So join us at our mastermind. This is where we go deep into how to do these deals and how to explode these accounts, all in a tax-free environment. And then obviously how we use these funds, plan for retirement, and we do it all through real estate. So this has been a presentation from the Cream, Cash Flow, Real Estate, and Money. Juan, how do we find you and how do people contact you to get started with their own accounts?
Yeah, so you can always call Quest. Quest has no automated systems. You're not going to get a robot. You can get a person every time. So you can even ask for myself by name. If I'm not available, you guys know my partner always is, Derek Long, as well. I like to schedule meetings. That way we can have a set time that works for everybody. My email is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me and just ask, hey, when are you available, or when can we get on a phone call? It's very simple. It's Juan, Juan, period. My last name, Deshon, Deshon at questtrust.com. So very, very easy email there. You shoot me an email and we're happy to jump on and answer any questions you guys have. If there's things that we cannot answer, Quest is like very well connected. I can get to people that help out, maybe find the answer for you. Again, I'm not here to give advice or anything. I'm kind of just here to educate you on what you can do for IRA accounts. Guys like David, RJ, or you go to kind of learn strategies and to see how you can, as you mentioned, implement strategies to gain wealth. So
RJ, bring us home.
Juan, thank you for your time. You guys, make sure you check our links below. You can have access to Juan and his team and all of our resources as well. And until next time, we'll see you in the next video.